I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you all of you for joining us from whatever time zone you're in. We appreciate all of you being here. So I'm Catherine and I'll be helping to moderate this evening, and we're very excited to be in conversation with all of you about historic preservation and sustainability. And we're very happy to have Dr. Lorraine Minatoishi with us here at Pratt Institute for our final lecture of the AIAS lecture series. So just to introduce our speaker a little bit tonight, Lorraine Minatoishi, Ph.D., AIA Lead AP, is the president and owner of AEPEC, an award-winning architecture firm specializing in residential, commercial, and government projects with an emphasis on historical architecture. She has won numerous awards on projects such as the Royal Hawaiian Hotel and Sheraton Waikiki Master Plan and the rehabilitation of Building 9 at Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. Dr. Minatoishi has also produced the film Aloha Buddha, a documentary examining the history and growth of Japanese Buddhism in Hawaii, awarded Audience Best Documentary of the Year at the Hawaii International Film Festival in 2011. Dr. Minatoishi is presently serving on the National AIA Historic Resources Committee, AIA Hawaii State Board Council, and Board of Friends of Kapiolani Park Preservation Society. Minatoishi has previously served on the AIA Honolulu Board of Directors, Historic Hawaii Foundation Board of Trustees, was vice chair on the Hawaii Historic Review Board, and was president of the nonprofit Friends of Honolulu Park Memorial. So we are so excited and honored to have you here tonight with us, Lorraine, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for such a nice presentation of me. I guess I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time, everybody, to join us this evening, because I know it's Friday evening at 6:30. So it takes dedication to join us this evening, I know. So I hope to make your time worthwhile. I will start with, we have a few slides to show this evening, and then we'll have question and answer period, but you can interject anytime. Let's see, how am I going to do this? Okay, here we go. This is just a little bit about myself. I do have a Doctor of Engineering with the emphasis in architectural history. I am born and raised in Hawaii. And I went to the University of Hawaii here, and then I went to University of Oregon for my master's, and then I went to Tokyo, Waseda University for my PhD, because I was interested in the tea house architecture as well as the temple architecture. So when I came back to Hawaii after graduation, I was married. I had 2 children. You might know Hannah. She went to also Pratt for a year. And so I started my firm in 2003. So it's been 19 years now. And I can show you what we are doing now. So AEPEC is the name of the firm. We are now an SBA 8A participant, and what that means is for federal projects, we do have set-asides, what we call small business set-asides, to allow small businesses to have a chance in the federal procurement arena. But we are located in Honolulu, also an office in Guam. We have a joint venture which has office in California and in Japan as well. So my historic preservation certification is 36 CFR, and we are able to review federal projects as well as state projects for Section 106, and I'll kind of get into that a little bit as we go on. We have extensive building reuse and building renovation experience, as well as new building and sustainable projects as well. So this is a screenshot of our website homepage. It's just a screenshot, so I can't kind of take you through all of these issues, but we have we discuss our technical qualifications, um, environmental solutions, historic preservations, CMMC, which is security related projects. And we do talk about also our small business component and our locations. So I encourage you to take a look at it later if you'd like to know more. A few of the questions that was asked of me to respond to are listed here. And so I thought I would just list them so I remember that I should answer them. First is, how did you start your firm? Both my parents are entrepreneurs. And so that's kind of inbred into my DNA, I guess. And I've always wanted to start my own firm. So after working in about 4 other firms first to get experience, I decided to venture out and start my own firm. I didn't really know too much about what it meant to start a firm. It's not the best way to start, but you learn as you go, and that's kind of what I did. And so what made you interested in preservation? Well, I've always been interested in historic buildings, in history, in culture and place. And so that passion just translated into my profession. And how did you grow your firm? Well, a lot of that had to do with the federal government being sensitive to small business and being able to plug into federal programs that allow us to participate. And then, other than historic preservation, what projects do you do? I guess we do environmental work now. We do a lot of military work, and we do other, I guess, research work, I guess, is a large part of our business as well. How long or how has Lorraine Minatoishi integrated preservation into her practice, and how has given AEPEC an important specialty in the wide field of architecture? Well, we have really been able to understand buildings from a different perspective, I would say, than typical architects do. Many times when you see an older structure, you're thinking, you're encouraged, in fact, I'd say in schools to look at how to renovate them by maybe demolition instead of renovation, or partial demolition, rather than really caring for what was there and how it became there in the first place, and what was the original thoughts of the architect when it was originally designed. So that, I think, is how we approach a building, and we really try and keep the fabric of the structure as much as possible and keep the spirit of the building as much as possible. And what started out as my passion in historical architecture has led me to the profession of historic preservation. So regulatory laws and codes matter. They mandate on both the federal and state levels how our roles are defined. And with our involvement in these federal and state projects, we're able to include capability like historic preservation in our capabilities. That has been very helpful for us as we work on other projects like environmental assessment, environmental cleanup, abatement, things like that, because those are also dealing with historic structures most of the time. Saving and restoring buildings is probably one of the most important sustainable things that you can do as an architect, because we are not building from scratch. Buildings contribute nearly 40% of the world's fossil fuel carbon dioxide emissions in the construction of it. The renovation of the existing buildings dramatically reduces embodied carbon, which is carbon emitted during new construction by the manufacture, transport, and assembly of materials. And as a result, architects can renovate existing buildings to reduce their operational carbon to zero, lessening their contribution to climate change. I wouldn't say zero, but much less definitely than building new. So building restoration not only preserves buildings for the future and for the history of our communities, but it also preserves our sustainable resources as well. And here is the history of sustainability in architecture. It started back in 1906 with the organic architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, talking about hygiene in the early 1900s. We get into solar design in the 1930s, environmental design in the 1960s. At that time, historic preservation becomes a topic. And the National Preservation Act starts in the late 1960s. And then we go through to sustainable development in the 80s. And now we're into resilient design. So we've come a long way, and hopefully our travels are continuing in the right direction. Sorry. So what defines a historic building? First of all, has to be 50 years old, or it can be less than 50 years old, but it must be exceptionally important. Next is it has to have significance. So, excuse me. Either it has to be significant to the broader patterns of our history. Secondly, it could be significant for association with an important person, like a president, or it could embody a certain architectural characteristic. Could be a work of a Frank Lloyd Wright or Le Corbusier or something like that. Or it could yield important history or prehistory information, which is basically archaeology. Also, it should have integrity. So it has to have, or should have integrity of location, setting, design, materials, workmanship, and association. So 4 elements of historic preservation are preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, or reconstruction. What's important for architects to be aware of? First of all, there are many rules and laws guiding historic preservation. Now, all architects should be aware of this because it can impact them in the development or work that they do on a daily basis. Laws requiring preservation are intact, and these preservation laws can either enhance or restrict historic resource protection efforts. So firms that understand these rules and laws will allow them to respond to unforeseeable issues that could result in project slowdowns. Sorry, I'm just going to move this. Now, what kind of federal preservation laws are there? There are several. There are more than what I show here. Some of them, though, are listed here. The National Preservation Act, National Environmental Policy Acts, Section 106, Section 4F, Historic Sites Act of 1935, and Archaeological Resource Protection Act. I primarily deal with Section 106. That is the law that guides preservation for federal projects. Lastly, there's the Historic Register nomination. If there's a historic building that you believe is very significant and should be recognized, you can put a building on the historic register as long as it's over 50 years old and it is significant. There's a register. Basically, it's a form you fill out and you talk about the important architectural features as well as including photos and other bibliographical references. So I think that's my last slide. And I would be happy to answer any questions you might have. Was that too fast of a presentation?
No, it was wonderful. Thank you so much, Lorraine. Just you gave us so much detail, and just to hear your story, it was amazing. So thank you. One question I had is that it was really interesting to see that you grew up in Hawaii and then also like went to school there. Now you're practicing there. So in your work, what is it like to kind of combine like culturally intensive work and also think about like the nature of Hawaii? And what is the process like for you going through a historic preservation project?
Right, that's a really good question. Here in Hawaii, there are several different building types that have their own history. So there's Hawaiian architecture, there's plantation architecture, there's a lot of archaeology, there's mission style architecture. There's so many different types. And we just have to recognize what is this building telling us as far as cultural importance. So many times we actually create a historic context study that defines what the building is all about, what cultural impacts affected the building, and then work to figure out how best to rehabilitate the structure.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's so great to hear that you guys really focus on studying the context. So I know like now in school we do site analysis. So to see that you all expand on that and really focus on the culture and history of a place and a building is amazing. Do you have a favorite project that you've worked on since starting your firm, or one that you've learned like that has been a big learning lesson for you?
Yes, we're working on the Kalakaua Post Office right now. It's located in downtown Honolulu. Maybe I can bring up a few slides on that. I don't know. Okay, I think we'll show a few slides. It was built in 1915. And it's a steel structure, but it's also stucco, barrel tile roof, and art, arches and arcades. But it's interesting that it was built by King Kalakaua as their main post office when it was still a Hawaiian kingdom. And it is located just across the street from the palace, the Iolani Palace, which is the only palace in America. That was built in the late 1800s. And it was the first building to have electricity. So across the street from the post office is also the very first electrical plant, I guess, in America. So all of these buildings, are, you look at it and it's all working together. That tells a story. So I guess we could bring up some, but so it's over 100 years old now, and it needs a new roof, needs new structural framing. A lot of the steel is rusting. So it's a very big challenge to understand how best to repair all of this damage that has gone on the last 100 years and hasn't been fixed.
I have one question. Like, there's always like to get the project as an architecture firm or architect, like there's a bidding process before we start work on it. So is it different like in like historical preservation, like that kind of like project, or what is the main, critical issue, like the part when you're like trying to gain the project, like own the project, get the project through the bidding process?
Oh, so that's a good question. Historic preservation and rehabilitation of buildings is very different than building new, because you don't really know what all the problems are until you open up the building. So we actually work with the contractor early on to cut holes where we need to see, maybe take off some of the roofing, to see what the structure looks like. Right now for the post office, we've been cutting holes. I mean, it looks terrible. We've been cutting holes in the stucco just to see where the rust has traveled to in the structure, because water travels down and we just don't know how far down the rust continues. So we start at the top, we make holes, we keep going all the way down until we don't see any more rust. Now, where that will happen, we haven't even figured that out yet. So that's, we cannot give a fixed fee for this type of work. We must work on time and materials, what we call, because we have to just see where it leads us. So, a lot of times we work on small projects for a client. It might just be, well, this one, for instance, started because a palm tree fell on the roof. So we worked with the client just to fix that tiny little area. Then they asked us to change out some windows, and then they said, okay, we want to re-roof the building, and now we want to strengthen the building, and now we want to put AC on the building. So it just kind of grew and grew, but they have to trust you first, and that's true for any kind of project. So now we're just friends and we just work together, and that's kind of the best thing to happen on a building and with clients, because you want clients that are long-term, because you don't always want to be searching for another job. You want it just to be natural. So that's the way we approach it, is just gain the trust, do good work, make sure it progresses smoothly. Yeah.
That is super interesting. Like, how did you, sorry, actually like John, like he has question. So you can speak up, like if you can turn on your microphone.
Yeah, I was just wondering, in project plans, are there often ways for that project plan to communicate with the community about the benefits of all the work that you've done? So when the project is finished and the post office is back to being the quality building that it was originally built to be, how's the community informed? Not only, the day of the grand opening, but months later, are there brochures, and how does that normally happen?
How does it happen? Well, we have newsletters. But yes, to the general public, sometimes, so we inform the Historic Hawaii Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that publishes important projects that go on in the state, especially those projects that receive grant funding. So we do have that avenue, and we use that avenue quite a bit. Oh, here's the post office building. Other ways is through newspaper, business magazines, things like that.
So do people interview you for those kinds of articles and things?
If they know, let's see.
It would just seem to be a wonderful resource to access for an interview, to tell the community about why this has been fixed and the kind of people that have fixed it.
Yes, that would be great. If somebody wanted to interview me, I wouldn't turn them down, for sure. Sometimes historic preservation news calls or National Trust. So we're asked to present and talk about certain projects, especially those, like I said, that are getting grant funding, because they do want to make sure that the people who are giving out the funding recognize, that the project has been done properly.
Sure.
So that's the best way.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kelvin.
Hi.
Can I ask how many projects there are in progress currently? Because I'm looking at the website, and there seems to be a lot of in progress projects happening at the same time.
I think there's 25 projects happening right now. And they range from commercial projects to federal projects, state projects, and smaller private projects.
Because it compared to a conventional architecture office that we are more familiar with as a student, 25 seems like a lot to be doing at the same time. So how does this kind of firm manage the projects?
Let's see. We have project managers that lead projects. The other thing is that not all projects are going full speed ahead at all times. So a lot of times it's almost like just pushing the ball. You have 25 balls and you're just pushing one, and then you go to the next one, you push that down the road, and you push that down. You're just trying to get these projects to the next level, where the engineer or the civil people or the topo people can do their work, because it's a team effort. So a lot of times, we start a project, we make sure the team is properly set up, they know what they have to do. So a lot of times it's either abatement, or it could be hazardous assessments, archaeological assessments, topographic assessments, drain, wastewater assessments. There are many things that have to happen before we even touch the building. So these all have to be coordinated up front. If it's not done properly in the beginning, things happen, the project will get slowed down considerably as we move forward. So we do make sure all that is done, and then we can move forward with the architecture and engineering of the project.
I also want to ask you, how has your qualifications in as a PhD and in AIA and lead AP like benefited you in the qualifications of like doing these projects?
For architecture, for historic architecture, having a PhD has been very beneficial. I would say I don't think I would feel quite as competent if I didn't have a PhD. It allowed me to understand how to do research, how to come to hypotheses, how to educate our clients. So there's a lot that goes on that I feel like, you know, going through the PhD program was not fun. I mean, that was a lot of work, but it's really benefited me in the long run. Yeah. Clients are smart, you know, you have to be able to speak with them so that they feel really comfortable. They feel like you know what you're talking about, because if you don't, you know, it'll be readily apparent early on, definitely.
Thank you so much for that answer, Lorraine. One thing I wanted to ask is, when you're doing a historic preservation project, what is the process like for thinking about like materials and materiality? Do you find that for projects you're often trying to like preserve the materials that are already used, and or do you have more opportunities to kind of think about using modern materials and more modern construction methods on these historic buildings?
That's a very good question. We try to use the historic building materials as much as possible. A lot of times, truthfully, we're taking off the new materials that were applied 10, 20 years ago. Because, for instance, the post office building structure I showed you, that's stucco, and that's historic stucco. That's stucco that they hand mixed and that they hand applied, and you know, it's a stucco that's supposed to breathe. It's not like the modern EFIS or other I guess synthetic stuccos that they make today. And I guess 20 years ago, the stucco was 80 years old by then, or 90 years old. So it was water was penetrating through the stucco, and they thought, okay, if we just put on an elastomeric coating, like a rubberized coating, to not allow water to penetrate into the stucco, that will save the stucco. Well, actually, it's bad for the stucco because that type of stucco has to breathe. So what they really should have done is put a new layer of traditional stucco on it, because that thin outer coat is very it's dense, you know. So when you put, it's basically almost like a sealant, but it's still allowing the building to breathe. They didn't think about doing that, so when they put the rubber on it, then it caused a lot of cracking of the stucco because it's not being allowed to breathe anymore. So that repair is going to be millions of dollars just to take off that elastomeric coating, put on the appropriate finish coat of a stucco. So these are things that we're doing pretty much always, you know, just taking things off that shouldn't have been on in the first place. Mhm.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really great to hear that you all really try and preserve the original intent and the original essence of the building and try and uh, keep that as you're moving forward. I kind of wanted to build off a question that Kelvin asked about like all your schooling, your professional certifications. In addition to all the wonderful stuff that you're doing, you're also really involved in all these AIA committees and AIA Hawaii. And I saw that you're going to be the chair of the Historic Resources Committee in 2023. So congratulations to you
Oh,
for
thank
that.
you.
But with your involvement in the AIA, how is it kind of like it kind of supported you in the work that you do? How has it like taught you more about architecture and kind of helped fuel your passion for it as you like been in the profession and been working?
It's been really wonderful. I've really benefited. I've really enjoyed being part of the AIA, and I encourage everybody to do that, especially when you're, well, at all stages really of your profession, and from the beginning, middle, and end, because in the beginning, you really want to understand what everybody else is doing. And even just networking, not only just networking, but just talking with your peers and saying, hey, you want to study for the test, or you want to get together and talk about what you're doing in your firm. These are really great sessions, and I did that when I was studying, and it's very helpful to do that together because the test can be arduous, and then as you get into the middle of your career, it's really about networking. It's about seeing the broader view of architecture, and then mid to late of your career, you can really be involved in committees because now you kind of understand, and then you can actually be a support to other people and use your expertise for the good of the profession and the good of society. I like being part of the Historic Resources Committee because we work with the National Park Service. We also work with manufacturers. So we're working with Marvin Windows and helping them understand how a historic window is supposed to look, how it's supposed to function. So we really are working at the level I like to work at, where we're making change happen at the top level. So we see how much it can affect so many people.
I mean, thank you so much for sharing your experience as a board member of AIA, because the thing that we're trying to do in AIAS, as a students, it's really kind of as you said, talking to peers, share the experience, and like what we are doing right now, talking to professionals, we have more information, this is kind of really great experience, and yeah, and then also this is really small, but to me is really important question. You said as Kevin said, you are doing 25 projects at the same time, but everything, every projects are in different stages. But I'm wondering, do you usually the main works the project after doing it is a drawing CAD, drawings, making drawings is the main job, or inspection, visiting the job site and the measure, and documentation is the main thing. I'm really have a lot of actually questions, but yeah.
Well, let's see. You mean what do I do, or the main thing I do?
Yeah, and I mean, as a company, it's the AEPEC is mainly doing the historic preservation, especially post office, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
What is the main job?
Let's see. So I would say all architectural projects, the architect is basically the leader, and just like an orchestra, the architect is basically the, I don't know what you call, the conductor, right? So you have all, you have all of your instruments playing, and you have to kind of just direct everybody to do their project, their part of the project. And so the first thing an architect has to do is make sure the base drawings are perfect, right? They're good, because you have to create the drawings, and then you have to give it to all the people on the team. So it has to be looking pretty good. It has to be accurate. If it's not accurate, then people don't know, they make mistakes. And then you have to also, of course, speak with the client, make sure that their wishes are being carried out. You have to work with the state agencies and the federal government to make sure you're following all of the rules. And then we work with the contractors, and I'd say about 1/3 of the project is construction management, construction administration, because that is the longest period of time, and you have to make sure that you're talking with the contractor, make sure that they understand the specifications, they understand the drawings, they understand the schedule. You have to check everything they're doing, not just because, okay, yeah, they're going to make a mistake, but just because you know in your mind what it is you want. And sometimes that doesn't always get translated to the drawings or the specifications as you would hope. Right. So you have to be on hands and really make sure that they understand what it is that you're doing. Yeah.
Maybe I have one more question. Like, what triggers Section 106 review?
Oh,
yeah.
That's a good question. So Section 106 has to deal with historic preservation. So on federal projects, because, it's interesting if you think about it, federal projects, they're projects for the people. They are not private projects. Nobody owns that building. Nobody owns that site. It's really for the public good. So when you deal with federal projects, you're dealing with many, many laws that may or may not be applicable to a private project. And that's because the federal government wants to make sure that those buildings are being they are being protected for public good. And we've all agreed as a country in 1966 with the National Preservation Act that we've all agreed that old buildings are important to our communities, our government, our identity. There's significance to that. So as we move forward on federal projects, we always have to make sure that we are being diligent to protect that, that essence of who we are as American people and who we are as a country. So if there's a building that is deemed what we call eligible for the historic register, which means, okay, it does have significance. It is a beautiful building, or not even beautiful, but it's significant in some way. When we work on these buildings, we are following what we call Secretary of Interior standards. And they are very specific guidelines on how we're going to treat the building. Are we going to preserve it for, let's say, if it's the White House, that would be a preservation project. Preservation is the highest level of I guess, restoration, because it is we want to make sure that it looks exactly the same as it did basically 200 years ago, right? If it looks different, then something's not right here. You know, if you just add a wing, change the roof, it's not going to be white anymore. Now we're going to make it pink. You know, like people wouldn't know what to do about that. So we do treat buildings with a lot more respect, and we're mandated to do so by the federal government.
Thank you so much. I'm learning a lot right now, so thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. Kind of just building off your answer to Geri's last question, is there a difference between buildings that are deemed like historic preservation in the register versus like landmark status? And do you treat those two buildings differently because of their status when like repairing them or doing a project?
Oh, okay. Landmark status is the highest status it can have. So if there's like a national historic landmark, that would be definitely on the preservation level of restoration. You'd want to make sure that the materials are matching, the colors matching, and it does look pretty much exactly the way it looked in the historic context. So also sometimes if there's a building that's, let's say, 200 years old, and it hasn't been maintained, for instance, or it hasn't even been acknowledged to be historic until, let's say, today, the historic architect has to kind of look through the history of that structure and say, at what point in time do we want to bring this building back to? Let's say it was really important for the 1960 whatever civil rights movement, right? Then maybe we want to bring the building back to how it looked in 1960. But let's say it was important for another point in time, the 1980s, then we'd bring it to that point. You see what I mean? So you have to find out the story. When we talk about the context, historic context, you're really looking at the story of the building and then deciding at what point is the most important. And then when you do the renovation, you can make it look like how it looked at that time. Because buildings do change a lot over time.
Thank you so much. And kind of just switching gears a little bit, kind of building off the aspect of storytelling that you were just explaining. Something that we've learned in school is that architecture is very interdisciplinary and can be applied to a lot of different fields. And we were happy to learn that you're an award-winning filmmaker. So how did your like architectural knowledge apply? How were you able to apply it to film? And like, what are the aspects of storytelling that you were able to take from your work as an architect over to like a camera when telling that story?
Oh, that's interesting. I wanted to make the documentary because I did think, as I was doing my dissertation, I have to interview people and ask them about their relation to the building, or how the building was built. And as I was hearing these stories, I was like, wow, somebody has to record these people. Somebody has to tell this story because it's so interesting, So after I graduated, somebody was interviewing me for another documentary about another architect. I happened to, work in his firm when he was alive. And I asked them, hey, would you like to do another documentary? Because I have a really important story I think you should tell. So we went through that process and we got the grants and we were able to tell that story. And I think as architects, all architects, I think, are natural storytellers because we have to tell our story to clients or to the public or we're writing it down, every day. A drawing tells a story, a specification tells a story, our own, interactions tell stories. So we are definitely natural storytellers as architects.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to hear that you were able to do that project. And I also just wanted to introduce, we had a special guest just enter the room. So Hannah, if you want to, if you're able to mute and say hi.
Hi.
We're happy to have you here with us. It's been a great conversation so far.
I'm glad you came into the conversation, Hannah.
How are you feeling? You had dinner?
Yeah, I went to Tim Ho Wan.
Hannah used to help me measure when she was young.
Oh.
Yeah, she's a pretty good measurer. She's been measuring since like 6 years old. Knows how to get the tape measured. Pretty good.
I mean, like, thank you for coming, like, during Hannah, because I wanted to share this moment with like you and your architect Lorraine, your mom, and like everyone. Like Kelvin's here too. So like
I know, Kelvin.
Hi.
And Catherine, she was the moderator of today. And then I hope we can meet in person before you go back to Hawaii.
Yeah, I know, it's been so long.
Yeah, it's been so long. So, I mean, should we like wrap up the lecture? Yeah.
I think so. Does anybody else in the audience have a question they want to ask? Bryson has a question. Bryson, do you want to unmute and ask your question in person?
Sure. Hey, Lorraine. So I'm not too sure if you're familiar. I'm Bryson from University of Hawaii School of Architecture. I took your class with Joyce back in 3rd year when we were working on the Kauai project. So I guess my question towards you, so I was just wondering if AEPEC or as you as a designer, are there guidelines for historic preservation of Indigenous buildings and or structures, or would those guidelines only be towards those of cultural communities?
No, there are very specific guidelines on the National Park Service website. If you Google SOI, which is Secretary of Interior's standards, you'll see that there are preservation guidelines, and they're divided into 4 different categories. It's preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, or reconstruction. But they are applicable to all building types, really. Okay. And then there are several, I guess you call it white papers kind of thing, like talking about specific building materials or elements of the building, like how to repair windows, how to repair doors, how to repair stucco, things like that. So you can see those too.
Okay.
Thank you for joining.
Yeah, no problem.
I think Melissa has her hand raised. So Melissa, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I was going to ask, for example, when it comes to restoration, how much does finding like the original materials play into it? Like, do you sometimes replace it with more local materials that are similar, or do you try to keep it as close to as its original?
It depends on where it is. So if it's a part of the building that everybody can see, or it's facing the main street or something like that, we do really want to make sure we're using the original materials. So whether it's like a certain tree or a certain wood type, we make sure that we're actually replacing it in kind. That might sometimes means we take a cutting of the wood and we send it to Oregon and we say, can you please match this wood? And so that we can match it exactly. But if it's something like a roof, for instance, maybe it's a flat roof. Well, we don't have to, nobody's really going to see a flat roof. So we would just put a modern building material that would really make sure that water wasn't going to, affect the roof anymore. A lot of times the modern roofing materials we have are much better than what they had back in the past. So, but when it's where it's appropriate. So a lot of times we use modern building materials or roofing materials, and then we cover it back up with the original material so it looks the same. We do that too. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you for your questions, Melissa and Bryson. Those were really great. And thank you to you, Lorraine. This has been a really insightful and inspiring discussion. And just as a final question, I just wanted to ask, do you have any words of wisdom for all the future architects here or possible future historic preservationists in the room?
Oh, let's see, words of wisdom. I don't know. I think it's best to follow your passion. Like I said, I've always really loved preservation or just old buildings. I didn't know what it was called. I just liked it. And so that's kind of what I leaned toward. And then it just became a profession. And so it was natural and I like it. So I'd say that whatever you like to do, that's what you should do. And you'll find that there is a profession, there is a need that needs to be filled with that interest that you have.
That was a really beautiful answer. Thank you. So thank you to everyone that joined us tonight or this afternoon if you are in a different time zone. Thank you again to Lorraine and Angelica for helping us to set this up and for being in conversation with us. We really appreciate all the work that you're doing and all the work that you continue to do. And we're very happy that we had the chance to talk with you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for coming, Hannah. Have a great rest.
Thank you for coming too, Hannah.
Oh, and thank you, Angelica, for assisting everything and support us and everything. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us today. It was a great lecture series with Lorraine's incredible knowledge on the subject.